Hello folks, and welcome back to Mod of the Month, where we showcase some of the best builds completed over the last month over in the BitTech forums. Corsair has upped the ante and are providing a host of Hydro X themed goodies, with first place netting a choice of an XC9 or XC7 RGB CPU block, a choice of GPU block from their range, an XD5 RGB pump reservoir combo, and a Commander Pro. Second place gets a choice of CPU block and GPU block, and third gets a choice of CPU block. As ever, if you want to be in with a chance of taking part and netting some pretty awesome Corsair goodies, all you need to do is have a completed project log hosted over on the BitTech forums. Enjoy the builds.
As ever, a huge congratulations has to go out to last month's winner, which was Tubeless build by Nernafach. Now Tubeless completely stole the show, raking in more than double the number of votes compared with second place. It's not hard to see why though, as the build was truly mental in both concept and in execution. Now let's go see who the nominees are for this final Mod of the Month for 2020. It's been a while since we last saw a Mod Zero project, so it's good to see that Joe is back in the game and hitting hard. It's odd in a way, in a complete contrast to most of the PC world, we don't actually get many Lianli 011Ds in Mod of the Month. Thankfully, Joe decided to take things in a slightly different direction as well to most of the builds out there. Now, inspired by the colour combo seen on the McLaren 600 LT that Top Gear used around their test track, he reached out to source the exact same Luminaire green paint used by the factory on the car. He then set to work taking apart the entire chassis in preparation for painting. With the chassis now the signature green, attention was then turned to the cabling and custom loop. Now, in order to make room for the reservoir fittings behind the lower radiator, Joe made up a set of custom spacers in order to sit the reservoir a little bit further back than it normally would. The loop itself was then finished up with matte black acrylic tubing and yellow pastel coolant to match the McLaren brake calipers. The final detail was a large vinyl Razor logo that was placed on the main side window. Now, I'm not personally sold on this addition as I think it covers up much of the rig, but it's certainly striking and the colour combinations within the rig itself work so very well. Low fat is to cable work as butter is to bread. Now, if you haven't seen a low fat project before, I suggest you look up a few, because very few have made such careful use of custom cabling as an integral part of their themes. The Crippled God is no different in that the cabling ties the whole build together. However, there's so much else to consider too. For starters, the case is made from scratch, primarily using 3D printed parts and aluminium extrusions. For large panels such as the motherboard tray, this necessitated printing in 4 separate parts and then seamlessly joining them all together. When sprayed with a textured finish, you'd be very hard pressed to tell that the parts were printed at all. Of particular note on the rear of the motherboard tray is what several of us have dubbed the low-fat crossover. This is a particularly challenging wiring maneuver where one crosses the cables over one another in order to correct for the twisting in the pinout that usually happens between the motherboard and the power supply. This technique used to be simpler back when more power supplies came with a 1-to-1 pinout, but with modern units packing 28 pins usually, it's a right pain that requires a lot of thought as to where double wires should be joined. Now, with the texture black finish applied to the case, the bright pink and blue cables really stand out, especially when combined with the subtle UV lighting around the outside. Spirit of Motion is a true labour of love. Crafted specifically for the modder's father, who has a keen interest in automotive design, inspiration was drawn from the 1938 Graham car of the same name. Now, to craft the unique shape he had in mind, Maximum Bubble Mod set to work drawing the case in 3D in preparation for CNC milling and waterjet cutting the main metal sections. He started with the rear, which was then machined from 1/2 inch thick aluminium billet, which was then welded together, finished and later painted. This section was specifically made beefy as the entire front section hinges from it. Now, speaking of the front, it's crafted from 25 separate aluminium elements, all of which were welded together and then hand finished in order to achieve a smooth profile. To create the rounded panels and vents, Maximum Bubble Mods chose 3D printing. The parts were first 3D printed, prepared and then painted in matching red. The remaining interior elements are then also 3D printed and finished in black. I highly suggest looking through the build log for this one, as there's a good 10 pages of wonderful detail and process hidden in there. The final project hits the brief to a T and is certainly one of the more standout projects of 2020. In a somewhat surprising first for this competition, Cyberpunk 2077 might actually have been released by the time this video goes live. unless we get another surprise delay that is. But with that said, it's fairly easy to see why the game is such a popular theme. Aside from the popularity in on itself, the Cyberpunk aesthetic lends itself very well to PC mods. Now DB opted to make the most out of lighting in his mod, constructing the whole chassis from clear acrylic, which was then welded together and braced with aluminium extrusions. The panels were then coated in black vinyl detailing, which has the effect of masking out large sections of the acrylic. The result is a very impressive effect when the lights are switched on, with the colours flowing along the chassis and across various surfaces. The huge chassis is fitted with dual hardline water cooling loops sporting blue and pink coolants. Now behind the motherboard tray you'll find an array of panel mounted cable combs and cables rocking the same colour combination. When fully up and running, the lights really push the theme for this rig and firmly land it in the cyberpunk zone. There's nothing quite like a Christmas tipple, eh? Although perhaps Craig has taken it a little bit further than most. To tackle the Jack Daniels theme, after planning things out in SketchUp, Craig got to work crafting the base chassis from plywood. Now this lends a fun whiskey barrel feel to the case, which is then further accented by the staining. To add the decals, the case was then taken apart and individual panels placed into his laser cutter and etched. The cool thing about using this method is that it leaves a very similar effect to wood burning, since that's essentially what you're doing. The effect was further carried into the case in the form of a textured cover for the GPU water block and of course the sponsor logos. On top of the fun bar mat power supply shroud sits probably the main feature of the build, the Jack Daniels Whiskey Fall Reservoir. Whilst not remotely practical in any way, shape or form, it's hard to deny that this is a lot of fun. A Jack Daniels bottle was first drilled and then fitted at an angle so that the coolant perpetually falls from the mouth into a ready glass sporting some fake ice cubes. Thinking ahead though, Craig made two versions of this reservoir, since naturally having the coolant open in the case would just result in it evaporating away or splashing around, both of which aren't that great. The second reservoir uses the same concept, only keeping it a closed system with a regular custom loop. Now it does this by having fittings moving from the mouth of the reservoir through the glass itself. It all ties together rather wonderfully, especially when paired together with the EK Lignum water blocks and fittings, which you don't see very often. Remember folks, if you'd like to be in with a chance of taking part and potentially winning some Corsair Hydro X gear, you just need to have a completed project log over on the BitTech forums. Be warned though, we do like to see how the projects grow, so get in early and show us the progress. It's something I always take into account when choosing the logs for Mod of the Month. It also goes without saying that if you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe, lest you risk missing out on the culmination of some truly crazy projects, as well as of course the Mod of the Year, which will be kicking off next week. You can also find us over on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and builds.gg. Also, if you'd like to support the channel, make sure to have a look through our merchandise store linked in the description below. We've got some pretty sweet shirts, hoodies, mugs up already, and we will be adding more in the future, so make sure to check back regularly. Take care folks, stay safe, and I'll catch you next time.